And now we move into our second of the four '90s albums that we're going to be covering this week. And we are going to do Digital Underground, Sex Packets. I don't think, Josh, I've ever listened to the full-length album of this. I don't think there is a human being who doesn't know the song Humpty Dance between the ages of what? Currently, like, we're taping in 2023 if you're listening to this like 10 years later, but between the years of current age, maybe what, 47 to like 30, I'd say that song's kind of omnipresent.
Yeah, I mean, I that was the song I knew on here.
Another very formative video for me with Shock G with the nose and the hat, right? The Groucho Marx nose. Yes. And, you know, the live performance. Was the Digital Underground Humpty Dance video on your radar at that time, Josh? Because I know you did not watch as much MTV as Matt and I.
No, I don't think I've seen the video before.
You've never seen the video before? No. Oh, no. Boy.
I did.
After we're done here, you got to watch it.
Yeah, I did read some about Digital Underground and this album specifically. One of the books I have has liner notes for hip hop albums, and this was on there, and they talked about it and kind of the background on it and stuff. So,
well, why don't you start there? Why don't you take the bio part, since people are probably tired of me talking the whole time?
Sure. Well, primarily, you know, they Digital Underground originated in Oakland, California, and kind of had a rotating cast of members. Most famously, probably Tupac. He was an early member of Digital Underground, although he's not on this album, I believe.
No.
And the mainstay, kind of the leader, was Shock G, Gregory Jacobs. Also, his alias was Humpty Hump, so that was one of the things
he had like a bunch of aliases. Yeah,
he treated him like an alter ego, and people at times thought it was a different person entirely, and he never kind of said one way or another. Obviously now he has said that, but I thought that was funny. And they started in Tampa, actually. He started in Tampa with a couple other guys.
Isn't he from New York City, if I remember correctly?
Yeah,
originally.
He said he grew up. He spent some time in New York City as well, and that's where he classifies, his childhood. But he also spent time in Tampa, and then he moved to Oakland. And the idea behind the band is basically, you know, fully indebted to Parliament Funkadelic and George Clinton.
Sure.
That's like what he was trying to accomplish. They started out, or his original intent was to kind of be more social activist image and more militant and kind of like Black Panthers-esque in terms of their music, but they quickly moved away from that and went to this definitely more playful, upbeat, sexual image.
It's funny you say that, because the music does not sound like this on that, but if you look at the cover of Sex Packets, it's all there. Like that's what you'd think it would be, but then you listen to this and it's like it didn't get there in terms of the product.
Nope. And their big hits off of this were the Humpty Dance and Do What You Like. Those were kind of the first big singles and videos that came out for this and really put them on the map. And the rest is kind of history in terms of what this album was about in their later releases, which featured different people coming in, but I think always being indebted to that funk sound and sampling a lot of different funk bands and things like that.
There you go. Thanks so much. And yeah, it's impossible to not get the Parliament Funkadelic vibe on this album without a doubt. But I'll let you take the first take, Josh. What'd you think of this one?
It was I definitely picked up on the P-Funk sound as well. I mean, the key characteristics of the album, it has such a playful, humorous, like party vibe to it. It borders on ridiculous at times. I mean, it fully goes into ridiculousness, and I think
probably at the concert track, I'd say, is where it fully goes in there.
Yeah. It's also just very
Gutfest 89 for those who want to be listening. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Which is a whole thing. It's very sex positive, I would say, and intentionally so.
Yeah, sex positive is a good term, yes.
And owning
horny could be another
right. Yeah. And just I think, oh man, when you talk, I'll find the quote about Shakji about what he said about one of the tracks, but just in terms of like ridiculous like sex acts and being like really horny, and the Sex Packets track, which is kind of like almost like a concept album of itself about this drug that makes your I believe wet dreams come to life or something.
It's almost like Spanish Fly and a psychedelics. At first I thought it was birth control, and then there was a part of me that thought, are Sex Packets condoms? But no, it's like Spanish Fly meets psychedelics, it seems like. Yeah.
It definitely goes into, in the way that Parliament does, and George Clinton, when we talked about computer games, it just is out there at times, especially in a track like Underwater Rhymes, where they're talking about fish, interacting with one another. I think he's a blowfish at some point, he says, and it's just kind of, it really takes on a cartoonish psychedelic type of mindset.
My favorite line tracks was, "Your wife just looks just like a fat blue grouper," was, I believe, the line I wrote down.
Yeah. So there's a lot of metaphors and comparisons in the lyrics along those lines. The guitar riffs are really good at times. There's a lot of samples from previous funk songs, and in the same way that Parliament sampled other people. And Gutfest 89 is really just kind of a sex festival.
With an interesting, they really like The Who, which I thought was like, it's like all these different, yes, yeah, it's all these different genres of stuff with Digital Underground headlining, but they mentioned The Who is playing, and I think it's The Clash, and then they go back, and then there's another set by The Who, which made me laugh. Like, someone in the band clearly liked The Who because they were the stand-in for rock music on that. So yeah.
Yeah, that was funny too. It's very tongue-in-cheek. It's definitely reminiscent to Slick Rick in a lot of ways in terms of their sounds. I think Shock G.
Yeah, or like Too Short is another one, who's another Oakland act, like sort of like that whole like sex exaggeration where you're laughing because it's so ridiculous that you can't take it seriously.
Yep. And Shock G has said too that, a lot of the bands like NWA and those were all so serious and acting all hard and everything, and he really wanted something that was more playful and didn't take itself so seriously, and I would say they accomplished that on this album.
Oh yeah, well, and it's funny because it's mostly that like P-Funk West Coast sound, but a track like Freaks of the Industry sounds like an East Coast track in some ways. It could have very easily been straight from New York at that area. That's one of my favorite tracks on this album, Freaks of the Industry. It's the album's a little long, I'd say. I don't know if it needs to be over an hour. That is, even P-Funk, right? We're smart enough to make like 7-song albums, right? So the tracks went long, but it still came in at around the 40-minute mark. Now, we talked earlier, is that because the vinyl format did not allow you to go further and they would have done this, or is this something that it's an artistic decision made along the way? But I think I was a little surprised by how much this was indebted to funk. I was expecting sort of like an early 90s sort of drum and bass type album, right? With scratching and stuff like that. And while there's elements of it, this one, delved into a little bit of jazz, a little bit of P-Funk, a little bit of drum and bass. There's stuff along the way. Some of the songs were long form, like Sex Packets is 7 minutes. Yep. The Way We Swing is, the first 3 tracks are all over 6 minutes, but then there's, a couple interludes like Packet Prelude and the New Jazz, which kind of move into a street scene, right, are all there. I would say I was slight thumbs up on this album because some of the tracks, I think for the album format, I would have preferred more like around the 4 to 4.5 minute I think
Yeah.
some of them dragged a little bit after a while. Do What You Like was a enjoyable track, but at the 8 minutes and 53 mark, I feel like it said all it needed to say at about 6.
Yep.
That's my one knock on this.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it goes a little long. They are definitely like in the zone and kind of playing up the the length of the sex. Like you could have sex to these songs probably, or that might have been their intention. I would say
You should report on that, Josh.
Yeah,
Make it
yeah,
make it
sure.
a book report. Yeah.
Shock G said too that Prince was a big influence on them.
Yes.
And he said, quote, George Clinton was never that hung up on sex. He was more spiritual, but Prince
Correct.
really got into the eroticism. He ruined a lot of us, turned us into a bunch of pervs.
That kind of is a great way to describe it. Like half
Yeah.
funkadelic with half, Prince sex with half funkadelic absurdity, like fantasy worlds. So it's funny you mention him, because that, if I were describing this to someone, that would be how I would describe it. Like with an underpinning of bass. The lyrics are very funny. It's also not. It's an album that can hang in the modern time too. Because while it's sexy, it is not aggressive, right? Or like women as property. There is, of course, the thing where it's like they're in cages and stuff, but not in a we're putting them in, more just, I guess, of the time, right? Like stripper vibe type thing. That's probably the one thing that doesn't age as well. But for the most part, I think if you were a female listener, you kind of get that the seriousness of the sex talk is tongue in cheek, no pun intended.
Yes.
by the Humpty Dance, which literally has a track about,
Well, yeah,
tongue-in-cheek.
they said too that Shock G and Money B, who's another one of the members, said that they really wanted to make an album that women could enjoy or appreciate, or at least know that they were sex positive towards women.
Yeah, like almost like at like a safer space kind of in the field. Yeah. And it does, I think it is successful in that, at least from my male eyes, viewing it from my context. It definitely doesn't seem as ominous or aggressive to women as albums I liked, but like NWA or, EPMD or stuff that, it was definitely coming from a more aggressively male standpoint. Even early Beastie Boys, right, is a little bit more misogynistic, I'd say.
Yeah, Money B said that people had always made sex records, but we were some of the first to say that we wanted to please the woman. So I guess that was kind of the...
Well, and that's Prince, too.
Yeah.
That's a big function of Prince, right?
Yep.
That his,
They were
that was
also label mates on Tommy Boy with De La Soul at the time too, and Shock G said that there was some influence and kind of camaraderie between them in terms of like lyrical. De La Soul is very much psychedelic too in a way, and playful. And he said that was on like track like Rhymin' on the Funk. Shock G said that you can hear them kind of aping their style a bit.
Well, and it's on the outskirts of that consciousness hip hop that's coming, right, in this era. We've seen it in De La Soul, but it's coming in like all of the groups that we talked about sort of in the collective last week, right, when we talked about all the bands that were influenced by Africa Bambaataa, right, that are coming, like Tribe Called Quest and Brand Nubian and all those groups. So if you're a fan of those, you could sort of easily get into that. But yeah, I don't know if you'd realize just how funky this album is if you're just familiar with the Humpty Dance. So come for the Humpty Dance, stay for
the rest for the journey.
For a Prince and Parliament mashup album.
Yep. And the Humpty Dance really is kind of an outlier, I think, to the rest of this album. So don't go thinking that they're all like that song, because that's so familiar. It is definitely different. I'm with you. I'm not like super high on this album. I enjoyed it for what it was, but it's not something, due to the length and kind of the thematic nature, I don't need to like revisit it too often. I think it's a fun experiment and kind of an interesting take into the 90s on where hip hop could go.
Sounds like a pretty good wrap up there, Josh. I concur wholeheartedly on that. So, slight thumbs up for me, but I'm glad we listened to it.
Yeah. At least I have it in my, repertoire now of things I can cite.
Reference.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And you're going to need to, because there's going to be a lot of hip hop recovered in the 90s. So we're going to need reference points.